Okay, good morning, Antje and Annette. I'm really glad that you gave your okay and go to have this conversation about learning, alternative ways of learning, which is in the framework, which is included in the framework of an invitation that I had from Arte Studium Generale to do a project within to respond to one of their studies. This one is the future of art school. And I decided to respond to it by writing a proposal that is called My Learning is Affected by the Condition of My Life, which was a way for me, because I'm really interested on question of formats of new forms of learning, new forms of producing knowledge, new languages. Then I thought it would be the future of art school could be a good way of having this conversation and all the questions I myself have about art and artists trainings, because I also have a background that is really in relation to art school that still have kind of very Western ways of dealing with art and professional art scene, contemporary art. Then, you were one of the people that I thought about to invite and expand the conversation, because I know, Annette, from your research. I know your research since many years, and I've been always really in admiration for what you did, and which I think is still one of the only like very broad research about informal art trainings in the contemporary art scene of Cameroon. I know also Dr. Paula Sako-Henry also did a seminar in Douala expanding the conversation. Yeah, so I really wanted you to be part of this conversation with us. And Antje, because of, we have a special relationship. We met in Cameroon, and I know you were really interested on looking at other spaces, geographical spaces, which is one of the reasons that drew you to Issa Samb. And I really wanted to exchange, because you are one of the people who was in contact with him and who knew at least his practice in a way, and also the work that he did within the collective Agitat. And one of the conversations that you had and you presented in an exhibition in Germany, which I thought would be a good format or good references to share with people around conversation, but also space of learnings and formats of collectivity. Yeah, so maybe we can start by presentation. Antje or Annette, you can start at just saying a little bit about you and what you're doing, where you are, how do you feel? Yeah.
Annette, you want to start?
Yeah, why not? At the moment, I think I should present myself predominantly as an art teacher, because that's what I spend most of my time with. I'm teaching visual arts at a high school in Munich, in a city center, at a state-run high school to pupils of between 11 and 19 years. And I'm very much enjoying myself at that job, which I took up rather late in my career, because early on I studied visual arts myself, and I aimed for a career as a contemporary arts curator, pretty much at the same institution as you did, Aude, in the Netherlands at the Appel. And following that, I was full of grand ideas. And I spent a couple of years in that profession, and this was very much worthwhile, because it did bring me to Cameroon. I got there with a couple of artists from the Netherlands and Belgium who took me along. Although I knew nothing about the whole continent, my only skilling was that I was rather good at French. And from there on, this was 10 years ago, I got hooked by the contemporary visual cultures from many parts of the African continent, but mostly from Cameroon. And well, my research interest emerged also from that first travel in 2010, because back then I realized that the artists working on site in Douala were highly skilled and very much very competent in what they were doing, also easy at talking about their work and connecting to outsiders like me. And this was astounding to me because at the same time they told me there were hardly any institutional support systems, no education in schools. Back then, not yet formalized art studies possible at any universities throughout Cameroon. And this is how I got into a PhD project by which I researched the ways of how artists pass on their professional knowledge amongst one another in those capital cities, Douala and Yaoundé in Cameroon. And I looked at that from art historical perspective. I spent like 30 years, more or less, of development, mostly in Douala, but also in Yaoundé. And this conversation has extended and it has been going on. And it took me to research, for instance, about people like Engelbert Weng, who was a priest, one of the first black Jesuit priests at all, and who was also an artist, and who has this fascinating double career, combining research, anthropological research, visual arts production, especially for church decorations, but also a man of the gospel. And I've just recently published a little text about him. So there's a lot of springs from this contact with Cameroonian artists. And right now I'm teaching students of art education at the Art Academy of Fine Arts in Munich, and I've also challenged them to think through some of my research findings. And so it's going back and forth between all different kinds of practices, what I'm doing. I hope I can make
Thank you, Annette, for this very generous introduction. It's good that you already mentioned Engelbert Weng, and you even remind me, maybe we'll come back further in the conversation. Antje, would you like to continue?
Hello, I'm Antje Majewski. I'm a visual artist based in Berlin. And my connection to West African arts maybe started like around 2004, 2003, 2004, something like that. So I went to Senegal for the first time. I had absolutely no idea what it would be like to be there, and we spent about a month just traveling back and forth the coast, and I made some acquaintances, and I bought somewhere on a market a big seashell. And many years later, around 2009, I had this idea that I should do a sort of like a museum of things, and this seashell was one of these things. It was a selection of like 8 things that were in my studio that I found very intriguing, but I didn't know much about. And I decided I wanted to go back to their countries of origin and talk to people in these countries about these objects. And I had met Clémentine Delis. She's a curator who has a long history with Dakar and who was also a member of the Laboratoire Agit Art. And she told me that if you go to Dakar and you want to find out more about this seashell, you definitely should meet my friends Issa Samb and LIGC, a painter, both members of this artist group that was formed in the early 70s in Dakar called the Laboratoire Agit Art. I met both. I had the great fortune to do interviews with both about objects in general and specifically about this seashell. El C talked also about a sort of like a meteorite thing that I had. Especially the conversation with Issa Samb was for me extremely important. I edited it. I spent about a year transcribing and editing, and I found it so rich, this teaching that he had given me through this interview, that until today I have the feeling I'm still learning from it. Yeah, there's a lot of things in there that it just takes a lot of time to understand, and what is even more difficult is to apply what you learned. Yeah, to not only understand intellectually, but actually take it into your heart and your body, and to actually live this teaching. And I think this is what the teaching that I received by Issa Samb was about. It was definitely a lived experience, something that you cannot just write down in a text and put in a book. And so I think this is why probably you invited me, because I'm a funny example of a West European, like a North European artist who got taught by a West African elder artist. And I feel honored to be able to say I was his friend, or in some ways one of his daughters. Like a great teacher has sons and daughters, and I feel it's a great honor that I can say I received his teachings, and I'm still trying to apply them. So that's maybe my situation. And regarding Cameroon, as I mentioned earlier, my husband Olivier Gesele-Garai is an artist from Paris who has Cameroonian roots, and we went together to Cameroon in 2000. When was it? 17. I would have to look.
Yeah, I think he was 17.
Yeah.
No, I think 16 or 17. 16? Yeah.
And we went for 2 months. We wanted to, of course, meet the family, but also we already had in mind to meet as many artists as possible, to make research, to maybe try to find out if we can do some collaborations or something, like that something might come out of it. And we had a grant from IFA for artist contacts, Künstlerkontakte, to do that. And it was really great. Also through you and others, we met a lot of artists, and it was a super intense time. We also made some artworks that came out of this, and I think also, some of these encounters evolved into friendships, which are also very important to me. And so that's the situation we are at now. Issa Samb unfortunately passed away. It's becoming to be 4 years, I think, in spring. And in my mind, he's still very much alive, and I'm also still in close contact with his friends.
Thank you, Antje. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to start a conversation about if we can start talking about spaces of learning. Because, for example, in the film La Coquille, in the beginning we have like a very panoramic way of a journey of the camera, looking at the space where all this conversation is happening, but which is also in reality the space. Living space, the walking space, the learning space of Issa Samb. And we see a library, a classroom at the same time, and still very open and connected to the nature. You have the birds part of the conversation, the trees also part of the conversation. And maybe in relation to you, Annette, when we're talking about the system of Grand Frère, we keep saying that the space of learning is of the senior artist, right? So I really wanted to have a conversation around this like space of learning, but thinking and reacting, thinking critically about the classroom as or the studio in art school, in current art school, of way of how the structures, the spatial structures of learning are actually looking at and organized.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you bring that up because when my students at the Munich Academy of Fine Arts thought about the Système de Grands Frères, they came up with something very obvious that I hadn't thought about, however. The fact that their professors usually don't work at the art academy themselves. They don't have their studios in that very building. Also, it's a very big building and it has plenty of space and the professors are given studio spaces, but usually they don't relocate their studios to that school. So the students end up not being really familiar with the actual studio practice of their professors. It's something that they felt odd about, and they thought the Système de Grands Frères is much more direct in that sense, that aspiring artists really spend time in the place where their elders practice.
Yeah.
Antje, you're now professor too, aren't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Where's your studio?
I'm teaching at Maltesius Kunsthochschule in Kiel. And my studio is here in the countryside. I'm in Brandenburg. I built a studio in my garden. So quite far from my students. But we are not a grand old academy like the one in Munich. I have a small office. There's no way I could work in that office in Kiel. Yeah. But of course, I'm also commuting there, so I'm not living in Kiel. I think that's the case for many professors, that they are not living in the same place as they are teaching. We have big painting studios. I'm not so sure if I actually would want that, because we are just in Germany coming out of this system. Actually, I was discussing with my master students yesterday Wikipedia entry for Kunstbetrieb, which is very funny. Yeah, it's a German entry, and someone wrote it who's clearly coming from the 1980s. Yeah, in this entry, professors are described as powerful people who have master students who think and do the same thing as the professors, and who promote them to become their mini doubles, yeah. And I think we are just so happy to be out of this system, yeah, to not have this sort of like a professor-centered hierarchical system anymore. And I can't see it actually for myself to assume this position. Yeah, I'm much more as a professor someone who thinks I'm there to facilitate and to convey energy and knowledges to my students that make them their own creative individuals. And I wouldn't want them to follow what I'm doing. So I'm actually even not talking very much about my artistic practice with them. I'm not sure if that's right or wrong. Maybe there's also part in me that cherishes my privacy. Yeah, that creative process is for me something that I need to be with myself, and I cannot have other people watching while I'm doing things. I don't think that's possible.
So do you think the classroom for you will be the ideal space where actually the learning is happening for within an art
No, I think it's a good space for discussing the students' work, yeah, because that's where they work, and I think it's good for them to be in exchange with the others, to be several people in one room, to see what the others are doing, to discuss, to sit on the sofa, to drink beers, to listen to music, to have a space of creativity where they are in together. But if you ask me what's my ideal teaching situation, certainly the situation that I enjoy the most are the excursions, because we have from Kiel, we are lucky enough to have the money to be able to do excursions. I mean, we know that we are in a super provincial small town, so we need to go where the art is. And I take my students to Vienna or to Paris or to Stockholm or to other places, to Warsaw, or also just to Berlin or to Hamburg. And this is, of course, far more like something that is a lifelike situation where we spend time together, days together, we eat together, we come maybe home to the hostel and cook together, and all the time, see interesting things. And then I'm organizing my semesters around certain topics that we discuss, so also the excursions will be organized towards these topics, so that we come home to the hostel and people are still thinking about it, and eager to talk. And I think this is very important, to have this sort of like a time that is not like, it's from 9 to 10 and then the classroom is over, but that you can continue if you are interested really in the conversations.
Yeah, I think I mentioned the idea of space because I thought the conversation of La Coquille is happening in a space that reminds me actually former spaces of learning. Some these spaces are actually happening in some regions still in the continent, but it was actually that the space of learning was not a closed space as now that is imagined. You are in the four walls space to learn, but it was something that was happening on the ground, in the nature, on a tree, like baobab. And the learning was actually happening because there were many connections. It was not just the teacher and the teacher and the students, if we can call them like that, but it was also many other things around. Now, right, the sound of the. And I was curious, Annette, where your conversations were actually happening. And Antje, you wanted to say something?
I just wanted to add that there were also many other people around, because
exactly.
Issa Samb was certainly the center of this space, but it doesn't mean that he was inside the laboratoire, like taking a position of being the head of the laboratoire.
Yeah.
In fact, the laboratoire was, and still is a space or like an intellectual space where many people contributed, many members, and they have equal standing. Yeah, and they were also challenging Issa. So there was a place for quite fierce debates sometimes. Yeah, and also jokes and laughter and. But also sometimes misunderstandings and quarrels, or sometimes nobody was there, and sometimes large groups were sitting around. Sometimes people were even sitting there talking without Issa being there because he liked to walk a lot in the city. But I want to add one thing. There's this idea that the space was open for anyone to walk in. This is not entirely true. There were like invisible borders, so not everybody would venture in there, I think. Many people were afraid to actually go in there. Also not anyone...
But at the same time, they were welcome, no?
Not everybody was welcome. No. Issa could be also someone very unwelcoming. Definitely.
Okay, yeah.
I think that's normal if somebody is solicited a lot. I guess every good teacher has to be unwelcoming eventually.
Annette, Antje mentioned something that I was curious to know about, because you are an artist, Antje, and you said you prefer more the broad kind of relation to the students, so that and you prefer to keep your practices more intimate to you. So you wouldn't like the framework of the studio directly with the student, the relation, But which is a space that is really present in the arts scene in Cameroon, right? That the learning space is actually the studio of the artist.
earlier on, you asked me where I had my conversations, and I assume you meant the conversations with the artists, the contemporary artists in Cameroon, right? So these conversations mainly took place in the garden of Douala, and this was due to the fact that I came twice, I think, during the Triennale named Sud, Salon Urbain de Douala. And for me, this was a very fortunate occasion to get hold of people that I might have otherwise had difficulties to get hold of. But within that garden, which in a way is maybe for us Europeans a bit similar to Issa Samb's garden, there it was very easy to access people and catch them. But I must also say that it was fairly easy for me to convince people to engage in those conversations with me, because I was not only coming as a random researcher, but because I was a curator. That made it much easier for me to get hold of people. I realized that only later when I talked to colleagues of mine at the Freie University in Berlin, who did their PhD just then, and for them it was much more difficult to have a conversation. I'm just mentioning that to underline the fact that the art system and Betriebssystem Kunst does affect all our relationships amongst each other, no matter which place we're inhabiting at certain moments. There's always that systemic power between everybody.
But I think this is something, for example, that Issa really rejected. I mean, for him, it was absolutely not of any importance if someone was a curator or a critic or a researcher, or even, like he would probably, if someone would have come into his space and presented himself, hey, I'm a curator and I'm a very, very important person, probably he would just be heading right back to his little, place where he could shut the door. Whereas I think the people who were really important to him were, for example, the children from the street, his cats, certain friends, certain family members, certain artists, but individuals. And this is something I also want to add to what I said earlier, Aude. I do have some students, that know my practice because we became sort of friends, because I recognize in them fellow artists. And then it evolves very naturally that they suddenly take part in something. They suddenly become an assistant to a video, or they become someone who takes part in an exhibition I'm organizing, or they, I invite them to do something in a performance or whatever, So, and it might even evolve in a way that I also participate in what they are doing. And this is, I think, the truly creative or more close teacher-student relationship, where you actually accept someone as being really like your student. But this cannot happen with everyone, because I have a class of more than 30 people. And there's many people in this class also that I cannot have this close relationship with, because we don't actually share, this sort of like creative energy. Half of my class want to become teachers in the school, which doesn't mean that there cannot also be some of them really great artists, and some of them are also develop this sort of relationship with. But I'm trying to be a good and a fair professor to all of them, and to give them knowledge and to give them security in what they're doing, and to help them start whatever they want to do. So that's also what I'm paid for. This is my job. The other sort of teaching situation is something that I could also do without being paid for. And I actually do it because very often this is still continuing after the school. The school might be finished, but these particular students might come and show me their works even 4, 5, 6 years after they finished school. And of course, I don't charge money for that. It's I don't even think about it. It's a pleasure. It's just a pleasure to see these young artists grow and come into their own and develop art. This is art. This is art making. Yeah, and art making and art teaching in that way is not the same thing that you do necessarily in a school. And I think probably that might be the same case with my colleagues in Cameroon. If, for example, I think Aude Yumbi is teaching, right? And also I think Justine Gaga is also teaching. Yeah, and I think both of them, like Aude Yumbi, I remember he's also traveling to he's not teaching in Douala, he's teaching somewhere else and he's traveling there and then he's teaching and he's coming back. His studio is not there. And probably the people from his class are not the same people coming to meet him in his studio. I'm just guessing. Yeah.
I think maybe in Douala or in Cameroon it's a different kind of setup because a lot of the teaching and the learning is actually happening in a structure where I don't know if I would call it precarious situation, but it's like very part of the living environment, the daily living, because people give the learning, they give the knowledge without actually asking for money. And maybe this is why, Annette, you were saying that it's actually self-exploitative, because there is no compensation to what is given.
Yeah.
But because everything that is given is actually happening in a framework of community or connectedness or family. This is where maybe the title of Système de Grand Frère is coming, because it's a family thinking. And you actually mentioning it, Annette, in your introduction, saying that I grew up in this context that we relate to each other in a family context. So people who I might not even been connected to family-wise, like blood-wise, I call them my brother, my mom, my aunt, and everything. So this is like in the same framework that even the art is like developing. And that maybe you might have maybe things that you can say more about it, because you had a chance to connect with artists from the art scene.
Yeah, maybe Justine Gaga, who was just mentioned before, a great woman artist from Douala, was in Munich last spring, just a couple of months ago, but it feels like ages because it was before the pandemic started. I was in another era. And she told me about her practice as a grand sœur, where she receives younger artists in her studio. And she enjoys that, and it's quite natural to her because she was the petite sœur of Godillet and of others for a long time, and this has been her most important school of art. So for her, it's quite natural to give that back. But she also said at the same time, well, then these youngsters are coming and they work with me, they stay with me in the studio, and sometimes they stay overnight because they can't go home, and then they're there in the morning, and of course I have to give them something for breakfast, because I cannot sit there, eat my bun and not offer them anything. And so of course I understood that this is quite an obligation to follow up to, and that's what compared with an institutional training system where people are paid and given a contract to work for a couple of years, and preferably without limitation, in teaching, well, that's a whole different story. And this type of self-exploitation is very generous, but it also then, of course, it depends for whom you want to exploit yourself. And it cannot be as just and equal for anybody who approaches the studio, because the person who gives that favor is, I suppose, quite definitely selecting. I haven't really collected any stories of artists telling me that they rejected this person and this, but I'm quite sure.
I think it's happening. I know it's happening.
Of course,
yeah, it's happening.
I mean, that's quite normal because it's an informal thing to do. Whereas if you have a professor at the art school, I mean, it's not that they all teach you greatly and amazingly. I've experienced that myself going through. I think I studied for 7 years at different art schools throughout Germany, and I've always sought for somebody who wanted to engage a bit more closely and taking on that role of a personal tutor of mine. Didn't quite find that person, so but still I got a general knowledge. I got that which I needed to go on in my career out from art school, and nobody could deny it to me. So that's what I meant with self-exploitation. And then, of course, there's a point that is a bit related to it, and it's the matter of sustainability. Because an institution like an art school is rather sustainable. It exists independently of the well-being of one person. Whereas amazing grand frères, and in Cameroon, a young grand frère who was considered amazing was Godile. Yeah, he can pass away at the age of 42 or so. And then everything that he had built up, and he had built up a lot, he had built up his own video art practice, which was quite avant-garde on the entire continent, as far as I know, at that time in the early 2000s. He was one of the only ones working continuously with video, and he had built up connections overseas, connections which other younger ones could profit from, especially in the Netherlands. And then he had built up this art space outside of Douala, and he had a number of young artists coming there, but also guests from other countries, other African countries also going to and fro.
And Justine was one of them, right? Justine Gaga.
And then he died, and he could not be replaced. So this whole wonderful structure that he had built up, that we were lucky enough to witness in 2010, it just collapsed, and that's a shame. I mean, there was a library of art books in Bonendale, in this village, and that was a place that was known well beyond Cameroon. It was somehow a hub. But it just crumbled with the fragile life of one individual. Yeah,
I agree with you. I wrote a text, part of a publication called Public Art Space. What was that? Practice Space. And I was really inspired by your article of Système des Grands Frères, which I'm also mentioning in the article that I call Family Affairs. And one of the things that is coming in the article is actually in the essay is actually the fact that many of these initiatives are really centered on one person, and there is usually not a transmission of, or how do you say, like when an inheritance preparation of which is also one of the fear that I have for Douala. For example, if Marilyn gets retired, what's gonna go? And we have the same with maybe CCA, BC Silva.
Koyoko, she also said that she already mentioned the problem of passing on her institution when she opened that art space in Dakar. What's the name again?
Raw Material.
Yeah, Raw Material Company. I think it was in the inaugurational speech that she gave that she already said that this cannot depend entirely on her, because it's not even worthwhile to make it, to build it up if it afterwards it will depend on her. Mm. So, I mean...
You also learned a lot from Issa Samb.
I know.
Yeah.
She was a great admirer.
Which because I thought maybe the system of grand fair came within or also is an art scene where there was no school, because it's good to mention that art school in Cameroon are very young. Most of the fine art that were founded this happened in 2009. And IFA Institute of Formation Artistique in Bamayo was one of the oldest institution where art like painting, ceramics, and sculpture was actually transmitted in a very formal environment. And I think the most academic structure, they came in 2009. And if you look at the list of artists, most of them are self-taught artists, but they're just people who didn't go through school. Eve Yumbi, Eve Yangem, they did some trainings outside of Europe, but this was not this were part of already their professional art field.
I think also maybe what made this generation of artists quite successful, because successful in the most positive way of the word, successful as artists and who were able to establish a practice that is really individual and their own. And I think this was also possible because they did not learn it through one institutionalized art school system, but they collected bits and pieces from all sides. And they collected lots of pieces also from the tutors that came with the Institut Français and the Goethe Institute over the years, because many artists did come and spend a couple of days or weeks there. And I think there were plenty of misunderstandings and a lot of cultural misreadings going back and forth between those foreign artists and the locals. But it was still an amazing source of knowledge, not only for the locals, certainly also for the foreigners, but I've only observed it with the Cameroonians. So I think this was a very rich moment when grassroots institutions like Doualat and Art Bakery and Bonendale had just emerged, and all these foreigners kept on coming in and going out, and there were exchanges across the continent, but also beyond and locally. I wonder if this can be replicated, or if it was just at the end of the 90s and the early 2000s until 2015 or so, was just a very rich moment maybe also in that art scene. I don't know.
Yeah, I think there is still a lot of nostalgia from these moments. This is also the same, I feel like, with Agitat, right, Antje? Because this kind of collectives and also ways of working together, learning, teaching, they came in a very important moment, like post-colonial moment, where also very informal structures that were copying from Western's whims were criticized in a way by artists. And I feel like that's how all this collective, like Agitat, came responding to the art school format, but creating a very more interesting format that really respond to the context of how people relate to each other and how they work together. And I guess now the art scene, from my perspective in Cameroon, is losing this because of the art market. Now, because of this is also one of the things that I wanted to talk about, the auteurism that is really promoted by the art school. Like the single artist who has to make money, which was not the case maybe within this collective, like Agitat, where people were contributing with each other practices. For example, when Mambeti was doing a film, Issa Samb was also contributing in a way. So it was not more about Issa Samb and Mambeti, but it was about the collective. And yeah, this is what I feel like the art scene is losing now, because everybody's just focusing on his own career, which is not bad, but yeah, I feel like this is one of the loss.
I don't know.
Can I also say something?
Yes, Antje.
Thank you. Well, I mean, Issa himself had a formal education at the academy here, so the situation is different in Dakar, because with Senghor, of course, you had much earlier this introduction of a French academy system, and also this connection to Paris, and as you said, Aude, I think the laboratoire was created also in a sort of like a critique of this colonial idea of what art should be, and this attempt to create something that would bring in a specific Senegalese way of thinking about creation of culture, while at the same time the members of the laboratoire were extremely well read. They knew exactly what was going on in theory, in the arts, and so on. They had connections to movements of situationism and to the Marxist anarchist people in Paris in a political way. Not everybody was an artist, In laboratoire, there were also many people who were anarchists, or like whatever, had totally different lawyers, or like people from quite high up in the society, down to people who had no specific job, just hanging around, I think, were all parts of discussions. And I think this is a very particular way of creating something together. So one part was, of course, this more like close group of people who were actually creating things like street theater, or who were participating in the Montmartre films and so on. But also there was a larger group, and I never actually was able to establish how many members the laboratoire had. I think nobody knows. Yeah, really. I mean, there were chairs in the courtyard of Issa Samb with names on them. They were all members of the laboratoire, but I don't think that was all of them. Yeah. And this is also something that is really missing. Nobody is writing this history. Nobody is going there to do interviews with the people who are still there, who are now getting old. I think, someone young should do that, should do this work. I cannot do it. I'm an outsider. I don't speak Wolof. Like there's so many things that I'm not the person to do it. I think someone from Senegal should do it, make an archive, like ask people about this time, because the people who knew everything, like Issa, who was a living archive of everything that has happened after the war, in Dakar, concerning arts and politics and literature and poetry and theater and music, he's gone. And his archive was like, he had all these like things about this past, newspaper clippings, whatever, books and so on. If you mentioned someone, he would go and just come back with like this book, this new, But all of this is now in a garage that Koyoku has the key to, and nobody has the key of knowledge to. Yeah, it's just a heap of old trash. And so this is, what you were saying, like how to actually transmit this knowledge. It's up. I think it's something for the younger generation now to step in and claim this heritage that is super rich, and I hope someone will do it. And just now, the situation of laboratoire is that there's a young group of artists who's continuing, but there's certain tensions because there are still the older members of the old laboratoire, and they don't all acknowledge the young laboratoire. Like El Hadji Sid, for example. Well, I'm not the one who should talk about it. It's not so easy. But there's one thing I also want to mention, that there was not only the laboratoire, but El Hadji Sid specifically was also very active in the village des Arts, and he created something called Tank. So there were also other things happening in the 80s and the 90s, not only the laboratoire. There were also other movements where artists created something together, spaces together, work together. And the village des Arts and Tank were never against the idea of an individual artist also selling his or her work. Yeah, it was not all about like group activities. And the same is also true for Maubety's films, for example. They were clearly GBLD of Maubety's films and not a group activity. Yeah. So the question of authorship is actually a sensitive one. Yeah, it's a sensitive one also for them, because not all artists had this idea that you could just take their work and say, "Oh, it's laboratoire." Yeah, some of them insisted, "No, this is my work. I sign it." So, to the end, I just want to say I believe very much that each new generation have to form their own new connections and have to have their own energies. And I'm super confident. I work with young people all the time. I don't think there's any generation that will completely forget about what art really is. That's can't happen. They will always be the ones that know what it is and what it should be, and it will go on. So just wait and like maybe it will come from a direction you don't know yet. I'm very optimistic always.
I think it also depends a lot on people's life periods, or how should I say that? Depends on how old people are in their lives. Sometimes it's easier for people who do not have a family, who are 20-something, to be very daring and to share everything they have, because they have no large responsibilities then. And this can change when they're 10, 15 years older. For a good reason, and then it's the next generation's task to share amongst each other. So this is just to underline what Antje was saying.
I would like to add one thing. I'm an artist who was young in the 90s in Berlin. Yeah, and basically,
lucky you.
Huh?
Lucky you.
Yeah, it was a really also very, very interesting time. Yeah, and basically, we were also in a situation where in the 90s in Berlin, you had like 3-4 galleries in the whole town. There was no big art market. Yeah, we were all into like feminist readings and like collaborative work. And I still am. I'm still very much linked to that time. And in this time, I also had this kind of like a teaching situation. Yeah, I had an older artist called Lukas Stufenhöcker. He was a gay artist, a painter. And me and other friends, we would hang around his house and his boyfriend's house, yeah, and just like spend days and nights. He had so many books, so many things he could, talk about, so many interesting stuff, so much theory that I had never heard of, yeah. I'm an autodidact. I never went to art school, yeah. So I really connect to what you are describing from Ervi Yamgen and Ervi Yumi. I'm actually friends also with Ervi Yamgen. I think he's a really great artist. And I feel very close to him in spirit. Yeah, I think probably he's a bigger artist than I am, but I think I can, even though we are from totally different countries, different situations. Yeah, but this feeling of like nourishing yourself from an elder artist who has a lot to give. Yeah, it's something I know from my own life in Berlin. It's not something that is only happening in West Africa. It can happen, I think, everywhere. And one last thing for this question of self-exploitation. If I'm in the situation that I meet a younger artist who I feel connected with and who seeks my advice, yeah, I feel that if I'm giving this advice, I'm not exploiting myself. I'm enriching myself, actually. So just as Lukas at the time, was also enriching himself by having us around, yeah, young, eager, enthusiastic people who drank his words and his, all his knowledges. Yeah. And I think the energy you get back from being with someone who's young and who is another, like creative, hungry person, to continue art, it's wonderful. You don't need any other recompense, even though, of course you need to pay for these breakfasts probably.
but it's also very inspiring, making yourself understood to somebody who really wants to listen, of course, helps you to get your own thoughts straight. And you only realize how much you have to share and how much you've learned when you're allowed to share it. And that's what makes it very a big pleasure to teach.
Yeah. And I was curious because you're both teaching, and then you had these experiences outside of Europe. What have you learned, and what are you using? How are you using what you've learned in your practices, but also in your teaching?
Antje, you go first.
Yeah, well, I think I already pretty much said it. Yeah, for me, the learning process was something that involved me as a whole person. So it changed something in me, in my way of being in the world, not only as an artist but also as a person. And there's one thing that I also want to add for this question of generosity. Issa, for example, of course, didn't expect you to. That would have been unthinkable to pay him, for whatever he was doing. But he expected you to be generous. If he would realize that you were not generous, that you were a stingy person, then that was it. So
you mean you had to use the knowledge for other people? The knowledge
no, in a very basic way. Let's take a very everyday situation. Yeah, he's sitting there together with his friends, and I had bought myself a coffee, and I see him sitting there. Okay, of course, I go outside. I buy him a coffee too. I cannot come into the space without a coffee for him, But then I see he's sitting there with his best friend. Well, I need to buy 2 coffees because I cannot offer one for him and not for his best friend. Yeah. So I come back in. I offer the 2 coffees, and then Issa looks at me like this, and I realized, no, I should have bought coffees for everyone. 20 people. I mean, just 2 is not enough. So I go back out again and I bring back the 20 coffees. And that's what I mean by generous. Generous is not like you just give something back to your teacher. Generous could be, in exchange for the teachings. That's also why he was helping very much. Anyway, this is getting too personal. Yeah. For example, one way of paying back would be that you could give to the street children, or to, not to him in person, but if he, would realize that you are willing to give back somewhere else to other people, that you are a generous person, then that was his teaching. And that's something that I'm trying. It's not always easy, but I realized, it can be time, it can be energy, it can be money, it can be some other way of sharing what you have. But that's something that's required, I think. To come back to this earlier situation, I think the exception is when you are asked by an institution, you can share everything for free, but if there is some money to be distributed, then even, also Issa would have said, take it, because then that money you can maybe, also use to do something else, to do your own art or to promote something else or whatever, So, it doesn't mean that you should work for free in all circumstances. You should not. You should, even if it's possible, as a professor, you should be paid correctly because you're doing a job. This is a job just like someone else is a good baker, or someone else might be a good nurse. You try to be a good professor. Yeah. But this is not the same as this deep teaching that I was talking about before. Yeah.
That's a nice wording.
Yeah.
Also,
yeah.
Respect. I think this is also at the bottom of the système de grand frère, or all these kinship metaphors that are behind the système de grand frère in the visual arts. It's a network of obligations, and it's giving and taking.
Yeah,
it's something to learn, especially if you're an outsider, a stranger. How you can. Well, that's what Antje said. How you can return something, and I think coming there as a curator back then was, for me, in a way, a good thing to do because I had something to return. I mean, and it's not just about power. I didn't walk up into there. I wasn't even able to put on that mask, I believe, to play the big player curator. It seems altogether ridiculous from here. But I knew that, we would engage in something lasting, and that eventually we would do other things together, and that we would exchange on each other's practice, and that this would be a reciprocal relationship. And that's so different from somebody coming in just in order to suck out some knowledge, even if it's for a better purpose or higher purpose of science, in order to preserve an archive or what have you. But for an individual, it feels different if you know that this relationship is going to become a mutual obligation at some point and not a one-way road.
Yeah. When Antje, you were talking, I was actually thinking about that there is actually a compensation. It's a giving and taking. Mm-hmm. And I remember situations where, for example, one artist has been very present as the petit frère of the grand frère within the studio. And when it comes the time of shining for the petit frère, of course, the grand frère is benefiting in a way, sometimes financially, sometimes there is a party. Like, I remember a situation of where after an opening of one petit frère, all the grand frères are there, and the petit frère is taking care of everybody. Mm-hmm. There is food sharing and even knowledge sharing, like thought. Yes, I think it's a giving. I also remember a situation of as me working as a curator, where you bring someone who is coming from outside to buy an artwork in the studio of an artist, and then the artist want to thank you. Yeah, so there is it's not like the formal way of like you pay a salary, but it's a sharing space.
Mm.
So I think one of the things that I remembered from your conversation, like with Issa Samb, was actually when he was saying that an artist should consider. So he's not thinking an artist as a profession. He's thinking an artist because he says l'art est une profession bourgeoise. No.
Yeah.
So he's just saying himself as a person in the world who has to be aware of the connection that he has with his context, but also the influence that he's making through his work with the effect that his work that he's producing has with other parts of the world.
Yes. Yeah. He says, to be an artist, it's a small bourgeois, profession. But to be an artist, this is, something that everybody of us can be all the time in the world. Yeah. And this includes also, of course, people who never studied art. Yeah. Just as Issa, for example, had for many years an assistant, Alyun Diouf, who actually carried out his paintings. Yeah, and Alyun was, I think he never went to school really, except for Quranic school. He was a carpenter before, and Issa, made friends with him and invited him to live also in this space. So there was not only Issa living there was also Alyun Diouf living there. And all the time, probably, I don't know how many years, 15 years, he was like a really like a lower in hierarchy. That's for sure, yeah. And now I'm so proud. Alyun is also my friend. Last weekend, he opened a very big exhibition in Dakar with new works. He worked so much, yeah, and they're beautiful, huge space, huge art space. And suddenly, as you said, he's now the petit frère that has finally come to shine. And Issa also said in his last weeks, Alyun, now you have to take your own head. You have to go ahead, you have to be your own artist now. You're not anymore working for me, you will become Alyun Diouf. And that's now happening. And I'm very super happy to see this happening. It can take time sometimes, yeah? It's like, why was I talking about this? Because of this transmission. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of my reflections when I was writing the proposal was also thinking about the art school defined now as being the only place where artists can be produced. Like you are an artist because you have a diploma from this particular art school, which I don't have any experience with, because most of the artists from the contemporary art scene of Cameroon, they didn't have any degree from art school. And I was also within my readings researching like indigenous ways of thinking about art. I came across the fact that actually art is one of these profession that came, which was part of division of actually life. Because when you looking at how time was actually divided within the African context before colonialism, everybody was an artist at one point of the day. So you could find the same person doing many professions during the same day. So you were just changing your casket. I don't know if I can say that, your hat, depending on what time was actually.
I'm also not so sure.
I'm also not so sure.
No, I can send you some references of the.
Yeah. It depends where you look. If you look at the arts from the grass fields, from my knowledge, they were like highly professional artists who were working for the
yeah, I think it depends on the society.
They had a formation, of course. They had a long time of learning, and then they had to be initiated, and not everybody could do what they were doing. Absolutely.
Yeah. Because of the grassfields is actually centralized society. But the indigenous, I'm not saying that this was everywhere, but there are indigenous societies which is not they are not centralized. Of course. There is no kinship. And within the society, of course, there is anonymous.
Yes.
Statue of the artist.
I don't know, but I mean, I know that even in very old societies, like prehistoric societies, it seems like people with special talents were the artists within those groups. So like artworks like this little sculpture, the Venus of Willendorf, supposedly was not everybody who carved around on stones within a community, but there were people who were especially skilled. That's what I know from my really superficial studies because I have to teach these prehistoric Stone Age stuff too. And if you look, and I don't want to put that on one level, not at all, but if you look, for instance, at the 15th century in Nigeria, Ife brass casting, this very refined, very realistic and highly detailed portrait busts, they were not made by somebody who was cooking and harvesting and herding animals 80% of the day, and then in the evening hours for 1 hour they made such a sculpture. I don't think so.
No, but I think also I agree with Aude that this is now a matter of definition, and this is a very interesting field. I also made one other work. It was while we were in Cameroon, we got involved in this. We were very interested in these glass beds, glass pearls, And I made one work about aprons, like these little aprons made with the glass pearls from the North Cameroon. Mm-hmm. And of course, in this case, they are made from the whole community will make them, and the designs are actually made by women. Mostly that were still at home. They might think of new ways of making them, and they work in the fields. They work in the household. They do all these things, and then they also make these really wonderful little aprons. And I think, in that way, I totally agree with you that for me there is no division between this artistic, creative activity and also telling a story or singing a song is art, maybe, what Issa was saying, this the professional artist, well, there's something I really want to understand better, and I think I will have to learn more about it, what I understood from the history of the kingdoms, of the art making for the kingdoms, is that these artworks, what is it like? The difference between them and these glass pearl items, is that the things that these artists made they were supposed to be charged with some sort of energy, and to be charged, you need initiation, you need a specific role in the society. Not anyone can do that, because it's dangerous. So, I think this is similar to our European artists in the medieval times who created things for the churches, who also had a sacred purpose, or at least, or even, let's say, the crowns for the kings, who in a very similar way were supposed to be charged by the energy of the king. If you have items that belong to Karl the Great, they were also the Reichsapfel or the crown were also supposed to be charged objects that could even, heal someone if someone would touch them. So I think there's also like a lot of similarities, and where it becomes really confusing, that's of course, with contemporary times, when suddenly this role of this artist who's someone who's able to express and to put in or to find a form for these like charged objects, suddenly it becomes confused. Who is he working for? What kind of charge is he putting in there? Because we still believe in the charge. It's not that we don't believe in it. The whole art market is full of this sort of like magical belief that the artworks are charged with the spirit of the artist. But what is the spirit of the artist, and what does it serve? And this is maybe the main reason why I'm so interested in learning more and finding out more about West African art, because I have the feeling that maybe if I can learn, or also Chinese art, I also find super fascinating. It's I want to learn. I want to reestablish what is actually who am I working for, and what is this object that I'm doing supposed to do? It should, in some form, it should do something good in the world, This good is not linked to money, So, and
I think this is
we need to find out again, what is actually our duty as artists in a society. Where are we supposed to work? What are we supposed to do? And what do these things that we create, what are they supposed to, in what way can they become useful? Useful in a sense of like bringing
meaning,
energies back that we need. And I think this is something I really learned also from all my experiences, not only from Issa, but also in Cameroon. And I'm still learning. I still have a lot to learn. Because it's a very big question. And it's a very big challenge, especially, and you need teachers. You cannot just go ahead and do this on your own. You need teachers who can show you at least some length of the way.
In the case of from my research and from what I know, the teacher is the elder person, and this reminds me the conversation or the interview that Amadou Ampateba is doing, and also this famous sentence of him that in Africa, en Afrique, un vieillard meurt, c'est une bibliothèque qui s'en va. like when other person died, it's all a library that is going with him. So I feel like there is many level of understanding this, because I invited Dr. Chander Narcis to write an article actually about it, and what he's saying is that it's not, we can talk about this way of understanding art professions and in indigenous cultures in Western Africa as something collective, but he's talking about communitarious ways of thinking the art. So everybody is included in this imagination of what art is. So there is someone who is intervening on the making of the material, of the object itself. But there are other forces or other people that are also part of all this process. And for example, as you mentioned, there's also a priest who is coming to chart the art, who is also, of course, one of the author of the making, can also be the king commissioning the art piece in a way that he's envisioning how it has to be. So yeah, so I feel like there are many levels of understanding. And what I wanted to say when I mentioned the idea of the division of the time was actually that you could find the same person doing art, but not defining himself, especially being specifically the artist, but just as one person with the community who can be the artist in the evening. And there is one author, Bingono, an anthropologist, who is actually saying that the classroom, for example, was the space where every disciplines were coming together, like poetry, dance, and music, and everybody was coming together within the space where everything could happen. Like it was the space of learning was actually the space of the party, the space of course the transmission from the elders to the young people, and yeah, which is also what I feel like was interesting when you were talking about Agitat, where all these disciplines are coming together. So yeah, I feel like there are different levels of understanding these structures from the Western African geography.
I would just like to add that actually my arts classes also take place in classrooms, and I think that's for any general classroom, that's the specificity that's also very beneficial for teaching art. That the learners that are gathered in that space, they draw on experiences from all other disciplines, and I make them draw on these disciplines, and I try to activate this knowledge from other disciplines for their artistic learning, and that can be very enriching. So
I believe so.
History or religion or whatever other classes they take, you can activate that knowledge and draw it into a better understanding of visual arts teaching.
Yeah, I think it's changing now. For example, when I did IFA, it was painting, because my discipline was painting, and it was just painting. Of course, we were doing art, history, and other disciplines, but it was the other disciplines were actually to help you on your practice of. And I think it's still happening even in the academic spaces in Cameroon, like the new high academic spaces or university, that there is just one thing that you have to choose, and if you find yourself in another discipline, it's actually not look good.
Yeah, but this is very much the same also in this Munich Art Academy, for instance. These old-fashioned German art schools can be quite motivational too for the students. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just to add one thing from this former conversation. I was it was for me interesting to see that I had the chance to visit to visit some kings in Cameroon. 3 actually, and I realized that nowadays even the kings commission, for example, paintings, like European style paintings of themselves. So this whole practice has also changed. Yeah, the kings themselves, they might have studied in Europe or somewhere else or in North America. They come back and they bring back this kind of taste for a different form of art. And I'm sure many of them also still commission traditional art pieces if they need them. But also they start now this new type of art. And this is, this is of course an art that is made for money. So this is something that people told me when I was in Cameroon. There was a big change in the art, in the position of the artist in society when money came in. Also after, with and after the colonial times, because before in the old system, now I'm talking about the kingdoms, the artists, the specialist artists, they wouldn't be paid in money. They would be paid in prestige, in land, in wives, maybe also food. And they would be close to the king. They would be part of his entourage. They would have an important role in society. And of course, they were known. People knew them by name. They were authors of their works. This whole notion of the West that these artworks in the museums have no authors. That's absolutely, for these artists, it's absolutely not true. They were authors. They were known and they were famous for being good artists. But this is, of course, as we said before, very different from more like rural tribal societies where everyone was participating in making things like whatever for the household or for the, adornment or. I feel what you said earlier, this change that now the art market has set in Cameroon. Unfortunately, I tried to convince myself to be optimistic. I am optimistic because I think there's always good young people out there. Yeah.
And then there's also artists.
But just of course, it's also very, very, let's say, I totally understand, if there is a sort of an art market that is just in the beginning, if people are able to sell works and they can bring back money home to their families, or for themselves, I mean, that's so understandable. I'm not against, people making a living by being an artist and selling their artworks. But of course, also some of this old form of art making, this communitarian sharing, creating culture together. It's just a very different thing we're talking about.
I think it's not so separate as you're suggesting now, because there's I drew out that book it's a catalogue of the Münster Skulpturenprojekte and
Mayevsky.
Yeah.
And of course there's these people also, again, it's Mayevsky and Mayevsky and some others who are trying to reconnect with those communitarian artisans, or however you want to call them, these people who are not making art for art's sake. And now there's this funny connection between people that are versed in the contemporary art world and know its rules and Spiel, and still they tap into that knowledge and they involve these people. So it seems like things get very interconnected now in a country like Cameroon. The kings start to buy Western art. The contemporary artists start to collaborate with the indigenous practitioners and so on. So, well, there's no reason for pessimism then. It's in flux. It's dynamic.
I mean, what Mayevsky is doing is very, very special, I think. It's to create these kunga masks that are actually used in the ritual. But at the same time, he's also creating objects that can be sold in the art market system outside. Yeah,
and he's walking that line. It's It's very smart.
I actually met the woman who was creating the masks.
Mm-hmm.
I met the one who is making the pearls.
Yeah, the pearls. You met the one that makes the pearls?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I think, Annette, as you're saying, I think that the scene is like divided in three, not divided, but you can actually find three levels of the art practice. So they are very traditional, even though I don't like the word, like very post-colonial still practices that are happening. There is this mix between the traditional and the contemporary, and there is the very much contemporary practice. Yeah.
There's something we haven't addressed, but we should maybe mention it, and that's the place of the women artists. I mean, three ladies sitting here and talking about male artists all the time. That's maybe an omission that we should not leave at that.
Yeah.
So you're a young woman having come through the informal art system of Cameroon, or maybe I should ask my question differently. Or what is the part of formal artist training and art schooling in your career, and what is the informal part of it? And was your gender somehow influential on the shaping of your artistic biography? That's I put it really complicatedly.
No. I totally understood your question. So I went to IFA, Institut de Formation Artistique, which is like a high school kind of framework where people go to have a training, a specific disciplines. But when I was going there, I just went because my father saw I was drawing, and I was trying to get away from the city and the busyness of the city. And I felt like Bamako was the good space where I could escape from that. Then I went there and I noticed that there was ceramic paintings and sculpture that you had to choose from the first the first year. So I was in the second cycle, that's how they call it, and I started in the class the discourse. And in the first months, you're doing every disciplines like painting, sculpture, and ceramic. But after that, you have to choose. Then I found myself in painting, and my 3 years were painting. I was a painter. And what is expected from you when you go from IFA is that you become an artist from the practice that has been taught to you. I remember that back then on my time, which is not so long ago, 10 years ago, actually, there was a kind of perception that the university was not the proper space to be, because you had to practice what you have been taught. And art historian, because I was really drawn into art historian, was not really like a professional field to go through or within. You were expected to be an artist. Then I went to university in Yaoundé 1, and there most of our training, even in IFA, were like movement from Europe, prehistorical art was also mostly not Africa. There was no Africa coming into the image. I think the only chapter that we had to African art was in my last year of the IFA, and this was just a chapter talking about sculptures and everything. And in university, in the contrary, I had much knowledge about non-Western art, especially African art, because I think the person or the people who founded the university department were actually anthropologists who were researching this specific section of practices. Then I guess we had a lot of focus on non-Western art, but African art, and I decided to actually orientate myself on that direction. which I gained a lot and which helped me in my practice. But as I was looking to be for a more training that will help me in the direction that I was trying to go working as an art critic and curator, I didn't really gain from my time at university. And I gained more going to studios of artists, which most of my teachers I were actually not doing. Because I was I wanted to work in contemporary art, but most of our things were from the books and from pictures, but there was no relation between the university and art scene. We had to sometimes do reports about exhibition that even the teacher was not going to look at. So the language even to talk about the contemporary art scene was different from students that were actually on the ground to the teacher that was teaching you about contemporary art. And yeah, I think all of my teaching, and my knowledge has been really informal. Meeting people, going with residency, looking at books, doing my own researches.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sorry. And as a woman, how was it for you to go into all these artist studios? Do you feel like you were just as welcome as young men would have been?
Not sure. I don't know. To be honest, I never. Maybe because I have my own, but I never. In the beginning, when I was going to the studios, I never saw myself as a woman. I was just seeing myself as a person who wants to know, learn, and so I had a really respectful relation with the artists, which were like Salifu Lindu, Ebe Yumbi. I had no problem with them. But I had some experience, like personal experience, like 5 years after, where I was actually realizing that some of them were looking at me as a woman. And I have experience that I won't talk about here, but which actually put me in a position where I wanted to go I wanted to leave the art form. Like, because I was realizing, then I'm looked as being a woman, and I had really bad experiences with men. But yeah, I had to heal myself, and trying to now think about how to react when I'm in the space of a very male dominant relationship. Yeah, so it's really hard. It's hard, and I know for young. Because now we have more women going into the art. Before we just had Justine Gaga, no, and Ruth Bellinga, who is doing more art history. But now we have more and more women, and I must say it's difficult to be in this very male dominant space.
But I think this is very needed to have these grandes sœurs as role models, so younger ones can follow.
Yeah, I mean, I was good friends with Ginette Dalu, and I never met Justine Gaga. Unfortunately, I really wanted to meet her, but it didn't work out when we were there. I was, of course, asking, everywhere. So where are the female artists? Because I'm feminist myself, so I was really trying to find them. Yeah, and I was really happy to find Ginette, and we became friends. Unfortunately, she passed away also 2 years ago. Very suddenly, yeah. And Ginette, for example, made me realize, being friends with her, I just realized how difficult this situation is, yeah. And also, she's my generation. She's a little bit younger. She was a bit younger than me, but about my generation. How difficult it was for her as a woman to actually find her ground within these male colleagues, also this male-dominated world, which is in Cameroon very patriarchal, I might say.
What about Senegal then?
Same. In the laboratoire, historically, there were very few female members. Again, who I never met. One of them is a great stylist, a fashion stylist, like a what do you call it, stylist? It's not stylist.
Fashion designer.
Fashion designer, a great fashion designer. She also made the costumes for some of the films. And she's a really grande dame, yeah. So I never met her. I even feel shy approaching her. I would like to meet her one day, but it just never turned out. And other than her, they said, oh, there might have been one woman in the 1970s, but we forgot her name yet. So it's not really something that was very much there. So I hope it's changing now, maybe with the younger generations. In Cameroon, I also met 2 other younger artists, Ange Khalifa, I'm still really close friends with. And I would say Ange for me is like a little sister, if you want. I'm a little bit taking on this role of being her bigger sister.
That's good.
Yeah, a little bit. We're because I invite her to an exhibition. She will take part in an exhibition that I'm organizing here in Germany in March. And we are constantly in touch, speaking on Zoom and so on. And she's now in Congo. And I really hope for her that she can develop her art practice. And Aude Christel also, she wrote me sometimes. So I have a few younger artists that are still in contact with me, and I'm really interested in.
Yeah, I must say, since Annette, maybe since you left Cameroon, a lot changed. There are much more women now claiming space. I'm so happy about that. Mm-hmm. More and more women are part of the scene.
I've never left Cameroon.
Sorry? I don't mean from your work, but like when you. Yeah, I think there is more and more. Not that I think there is more and more women, and even going to these art schools. And
that would be interesting to know if there's more and more young women artists now because they can have a formal education. Because when I interviewed some of the women that were already practicing in 2010 and 12, they said it was very hard for them to defend their career choice in front of their parents because there was no formal education available, and because there was no art school and no formality around their career, it was very difficult for their families to accept that choice because it was it meant hanging out with strange men practicing strange things in remote places somewhere around this town, and this was for many families just not acceptable. Whereas if
this I don't think is this I don't think is just for women. This is for it was for men and women, and this is still the case, even though we have the formal, because art is not a profession in you want. I also had problem with my family. Like, I want to do a profession in art, but people are like, what is this? And how does it work? And does it give you money? I think in the beginning it was for men and women. But I also feel like because of the expectation or the idea of that is around the arts, right? That you're going to art to become a man. This was one of the problems for women. Like there was so many expectations from a woman that you have to marry, you have to have children and everything. So the art will keep you away from that.
No. Yeah.
I think this is also what Jeanette told me, that her family never really, it was difficult for her, not only with the colleagues, but also in the larger society. And I think this is also one of the reasons why I would like to have this prize, because a prize is something official, there's a celebration, a ceremony, there's something, that people can be proud of, that they can bring home, or that, a young female artist can tell her parents, hey, my friend got this prize, maybe next year it will be me, I think it's really super important to have something that the society, like a award ceremony, that's something people can understand, it's not only the prize money, it's really this respect that is needs to be established. Yeah.
Nice.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. I'm grateful of the conversation.
It was very nice meeting you both. Also, Antje, whom I haven't met. It's a pleasure. I hope to meet you again.
Likewise.